You've done the research, you've read the books, maybe you've had therapy, maybe you've even diagnosed your partner or specific person as an avoidant. But what if none of this is the real problem? What if it's not your attachment style, but your self-concept that is keeping the pattern alive? Let's talk about the real root of your relationship patterns and what changes for you when you shift your self-concept instead. Hello, my loves! Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Lorena. I'm a somatic self-concept and identity coach, and I support women in bridging the gap between who they currently are or perceive themselves to be and who they desire to be or become, so that you can break unwanted patterns in relationships, in life, stop repeating the same cycles, and finally step into the reality that you were always meant to live and experience. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about your self-concept and your attachment style and why it's even important. Before I tell you that maybe it's not even your attachment style after all, but stay patient for this one. Now, what do I mean when I say self-concept? I mean your identity. It's who you think you are, it's how you walk through the world, how you feel about yourself, how you carry yourself. That has a direct impact and a connection to your relationships. And when I say relationships, I mean both relationships to people, but also relationships to things, desires, experiences. You relate to everything in your life, even yourself. And relationships imply some sort of attachment. Now, when I say attachment, that doesn't have to mean clinging. It just means there's a deep emotional connection that would feel like lack if it wasn't there. So attachment and your self-concept are connected. You attach to everything on some level, whether you attach in a way where you feel anxious when it's not there or they are not there, or whether you attach in a way that's healthy and that's balanced, or whether you attach in a way where you actually run and avoid when things get uncomfortable. So your self-concept is about relationship and attachment to things and to people. And if you've had therapy or you've been in the Instagram and YouTube pop psychology world, you might have heard of attachment theory. Now, I'm not going to go into this in this video. I teach in depth about this in my program, and you can look up the crux of it anywhere online by just Googling. But attachment theory basically explains the way we bond, the way we relate in our closest connections. And usually that's shaped by early experiences, by childhood experiences. And it often shows up in how safe, secure, or anxious we feel when we get close to someone. And attachment theory is having a bit of a revival. Usually, when women now come to work with me, they will tell me before we even start, oh, I'm anxiously attached, or I'm in a codependent dynamic, or the person that I'm interested in that I've been trying to manifest is an avoidant, or something like this. Now, the reason for this is that the women that I work with tend to want to change their self-concept in the first place because they find themselves in unwanted relationship dynamics. That is non-committal relationships, on and off dynamics, toxicity, not finding anyone to date. It could be being abandoned or being rejected frequently, all kinds of things. Things along those lines. And if you find yourself in dynamics like this, or you are completely attached to a person, or maybe even your ex that you've been apart from for a while, or maybe you just feel like it's time to release something, so that you can call in what you want, then I have a free masterclass replay for you also. It's called Liberate. You can find it linked below, and it's all about releasing attachment and breaking unwanted relationship patterns through that. So check that out after you've watched this video. But that's a big reason why women come to work with me. It's not always the reason, it's not the only reason, but it's a common one. So naturally, they've done some research on their patterns and they've often had therapy, so they know their attachment style. But here I am telling you to ditch it. But also not really. Let me break it down. Now, I've said attachment style, but I'm not saying it's not real. It is. Attachment theory is absolutely real, but over-identifying with any label keeps you stuck. And listen, I think it is great that these theories are coming into popularity, that people are choosing to heal, wanting to heal. And in fact, yes, we do attachment work and recreate yourself as well. Actually, a lot of it. We do it from a nervous system level. We do it through a lot of subconscious integration work. But yeah, we do attachment work because your self-concept is about the way you relate and what you attach to. So yes, that needs to be addressed. However, I never want you to box yourself into a label, because here's what I see again and again in my clients. And I say this with love because I think it's important to create awareness on your patterns. Absolutely. It's important to have some context around why you may act or feel or think the way you do. And yeah, I think it's great to have therapy. It can give you a lot of self-awareness that otherwise you might not have. But there's a huge percentage of women who come to work with me because they've been in therapy for a year or more, sometimes a really long time. I sometimes have women come to me who have been in therapy for a literal decade, and they just haven't seen the changes they hoped for. They now have the language, they now have the awareness, like they know they are anxiously attached, for example, but how to actually break the pattern, they don't know. Self-awareness only helps you to a certain extent. Without integration, without shifting the pattern, you're only scratching the surface and you're not getting the results in your self-concept and ultimately your reality and your relationships that you're looking for. Now, I say this as someone who comes from a background of anxious attachment myself, and I healed that attachment pattern. And I have a video about this, which you can also watch. I'm going to link it below in the description so you can check that out after this one. But what happened after I healed my anxious attachment was that I kind of did a pendulum swing to avoidance, which is not something that I even knew could happen. And whilst I can have tendencies, right? I'm human, just like you. Some things make me anxious, some things put me into avoidance, some things make me feel safe. But overall, my habitual pattern is that I'm very safe and secure. I'm very secure now in the way that I relate because I've embodied a self-concept that is confident, that is secure, that is not reliant on anyone else's approval, but that is also open-hearted and receptive. But in the beginning, before that was the case, I attached the anxiously attached label to myself. And guess what? Now there was no way I could not be anxiously attached, because that's how I'd labeled myself. Let me know if this resonates with you. Have you ever caught yourself repeating a pattern because you thought that is just who you are? Let me know in the comments. And then after that, I attached to the avoidant label. And guess what? I would call in all these men who were all in, who were really keen on me, and I wasn't interested. Or I would attach the avoidant label to a partner, and boom, of course, he would be avoidant. By attaching a label to yourself and to others, you're not even giving yourself or them a chance to show up differently. Now, I am not saying to bypass reality. I'm not saying that attachment theory isn't real. It absolutely is. We need it, right? I teach you to repattern this. But just knowing the label without the right process and without the right support for resolution just keeps you stuck in the identity. So what do we do about this? Yes, we need to do attachment work. As I said, that's part of your self-concept, that's part of recreate yourself as well. But you don't need to cling on to or overly identify with the label, which is what therapy often does and what Instagram often does. And this can apply to an attachment style, right? The label thing, but it can apply to other things too. Maybe you're identifying with being codependent, or you're identifying with being a people pleaser, or you're identifying with being an empath. I have a lot of opinions on that, by the way. Or maybe you're labeling a specific person as an avoidant or a narcissist. And again, I'm not saying there's not truth to it. In fact, a lot of the women I work with tend to be in a fawn response, tend to be in people-pleasing patterns, but don't make it your identity. It is not who you are. And also, don't diagnose somebody as a narcissist unless you're qualified to do so, or they have been diagnosed by someone who's qualified to do so. But note how, even though I have a lot of clients with whom I work with on releasing their people-pleasing tendencies so that they can step into greater empowerment and fully claim their desires and fully step into the self-concept that they want to live from. Even though I have clients with whom I work on their trauma responses and coping mechanisms, their lack of self-worth, I call it tendencies because it's not an identity. So stop talking about it and analyzing it to death and start doing the work to actually shift and change it. Start integrating it. Now, that's what we do in Recreate Yourself. That's what breaks the patterns. So if you want to do that with me or with us, you're welcome to apply or inquire. The link to the program is linked in the description box below, and you can also send me a DM on Instagram if you're interested or wanting to learn more. So what does it take to shift your self-concept? We need to do the emotional integration and the integration of the subconscious beliefs and patterns that you have, because the way you act, the way you label yourself, the way you think, the way you feel, that's all largely unconscious. We need to do work on your attachment patterns, yes, but we don't do it with labeling. In Recreate Yourself, we actually do it from a nervous system perspective, from a nervous system level, because that is the deepest level. That's how you create safety, right? If you're in an insecure attachment, you don't feel safe. You're using a relationship in order to feel safe. Either the avoidance of a relationship or the clinging onto a relationship. So we need to create safety in you. Because from a nervous system perspective, we completely rewire how you show up. We completely rewire your habitual state of being. And that rewires your attachment patterns naturally because it changes the way you show up in relationship. And then therefore also what you are calling in. We also need to build a deep level of self-trust and discernment, which ensures that you become open to love, because we want that too. We don't want you to be avoidant, right? And you also don't source your validation from outside of yourself, meaning you're not anxious. Your attachment style might explain the past, but it doesn't have to define your future. When you transform your self-concept, you don't just change how you feel, you change how you relate, you change what you tolerate, and you change what you attract. You're not stuck in a label. You're not a label. You're so much more than that. So let's get you to become the version of you who doesn't even need a label. Let me know in the comments what is a label about yourself or about someone else that you are ready to release. And then in next week's video, we're going to talk all about your imagination and why sometimes visualizing what you want can make you feel worse. I'll see you next week.